Braxton, Booby, you made another 10 questions. I'm going to give you another 10 answers. Let's go.
Question 1. If you have a deconversion story from any world religion, would you mind sharing that story?
Not at all. I would be happy to share my story. To begin with, to give you a little bit of background, I was raised in a Protestant church. I was raised Protestant in the Advent Christian church. Now, this is not Seventh day Adventism, even though they did come from the same Millerite movement from the late 1800s. It was basically your run of the mill Protestant church. We had very few things that would distinguish us from basically any other Protestant church. We're Bible believing, Trinitarian, um, adult baptism, full immersion baptism, held to the Apostles' Creed, that sort of thing. There was one thing that kind of distinguished us, but I'll get to that later. Now, about 15 years ago, I started studying to become a massage therapist. And yes, it is just as awesome as a job as you think it is. One of the things, now, you may or may not know this, but the massage industry is deeply immersed in like the alt health, alt medicine kind of thing. So there is tons of woo circling around it. One of the things we were taught in our massage class was this thing called ear coning or ear candling, where you basically take a tube of linen that's been soaked in wax and made into a tube and stick it in somebody's ear and light the end, preferably the end that's not in the ear. And this is supposed to like get the earwax out and improve your hearing and all this other kind of nonsense. So, and I was thinking, boy, this is an easy way to make money. I'm going to sit in a dark room for 45 minutes and light candles in somebody's ears. Sign me up. But the candles themselves were a little expensive, so I decided to see what I could do to maybe make my own, because I'm kind of a crafty person, and I thought it was better than spending like 15 bucks a piece on them or 20 bucks a piece or however much they were. As I went online to try and find supplies to start making these, I ran across a website that debunked the whole idea of air candling. And as I read through the website, I didn't just skip past it. I actually took a moment to read it. And as I read through it, the things he was saying were kind of making sense to me. And I got to the point where I was really doubting that this actually worked the way they said that it worked. Like, physics does not support this. So I decided to do an experiment. I got a tiny little glass jar like you'd put like essential oils in, and I used that as an analog for the inside of the ear. I stuck the cone in it, I lit the end of the thing, I did the whole procedure like we were taught in class, and when I cut it open afterwards, lo and behold, even though there was no air, there was ear wax in the candle. And that's when I realized that that was like totally a bogus thing. From there, I began to start examining some of the other woo stuff that's associated with massage and the alt health industry. Homeopathy, I tossed out immediately. I recognized that was bogus right from the start. It just was so superficially ridiculous. But you start looking into other things like energy healing, Reiki, the whole idea of chi or prana, this living energy, the meridians, acupuncture, acupressure, all of these other alt health things. And the more I began to examine them, the more I could see, one by one, it turned out they were totally bogus. From there, I started examining things like dowsing, um, palm reading, psychics, that kind of thing, telekinetics like Uri Geller, that sort of thing, faith healing stuff. And the more I looked into these things, hauntings and that sort of thing, the more I looked into them, the more I could see. Oh, Ouija boards was another one. The more I could see, as I'm sorry, I'm saying all this stuff. The more I looked into these, the more I could see that they were also totally bogus. So all of this began to create this cumulative case, sort of in my head, that all of this was just complete unsupported nonsense. You're pushing me towards a materialistic or naturalistic position. Eventually, the only thing really left that I hadn't examined were my own faith beliefs, and a combination of curiosity and intellectual honesty or integrity pushed me to examine those as well. And I began picking those apart and really looking at the claims and looking at the ideas. And yes, I did the rounds of all the pop atheists that you would expect me to. And I credit them largely not for convincing me of something different, but getting me to ask questions that I had never thought to ask before. And the more and more I studied it, I began to realize that my own faith beliefs were not supported either, just like all of these other things were unsupported. And I don't mean to say that Christianity or standard religious beliefs are in the same category with something like dowsing. I think they are categorically a bit different. I know some atheists would argue with me about that, um, but I think they are. Regardless, each thing that I examined separately. I didn't dismiss anything because something else had failed to hold up to scrutiny. I took everything one at a time, including faith, including religion, and it just didn't hold up. And I honestly felt like my eyes were opened for the first time, like I was seeing clearly for the first time. Um, and it was revelatory. And I stopped believing well before I was willing to admit to myself that I had stopped believing. That was a slow process, a slow transition, and it was a tough thing to deal with. But anyway, that's my deconversion story. So let's go on to your next question.
Question number 2. Is there anything that Christian apologists or philosophers bring that you actually do consider to be good evidence for God? And if not, how do you define evidence?
I haven't found anything from Christian apologists that I would consider to be good evidence. Most of what apologists brings is arguments, trying like persuasive arguments, logical arguments, that sort of thing. Um, that is that is not evidence in of itself. That's a reason to possibly look at evidence and move forward. How do I define evidence? That's a complicated question, and it varies depending on the context. Um, Logical arguments are not evidence for anything. I would generally categorically dismiss those as evidence. Um, Stories of someone's personal experience with God, I would consider that to be a type of evidence. I don't think it's compelling or convincing, but it is a type of evidence um, that I could see someone being compelled by. Um, Really, I think evidence in this case would need to be something concrete and verifiable, really. And like I said, apologists for the most part bring logical arguments. I haven't seen, beyond like personal experience stories, I haven't seen anything I would consider to be evidence for God.
Straightforwardly, I'm a dog person. Here's my dog, Indiana. Dogs, cats, both, or neither?
Oh, absolutely neither. I respect how pet owners feel about their pets. I know many dog owners and many cat owners and their children, parts of the family, and I respect that, and I respect what goes into that. But I'm not a pet person, and you know, one of the reasons I'm not a pet person is because I do not want to form an emotional bond with something that I know I am going to outlive with a great degree of certainty. And that's because I'm protective of my own emotional reserves.
Did Jesus exist as a single historical individual? And if so, how reasonable do you think it is for people to hold the position that Jesus did not exist?
Did Jesus exist as a single historical person? Maybe. Um, I am inclined to think probably yes. I think the most parsimonious explanation for the appearance of the Jesus cult in first century Palestine is the fact that it was an outgrowth of one individual's ministry. There's nothing particularly unusual or um, what's the word I'm looking for? Extraordinary about the idea of there being a itinerant preacher, messianic preacher, apocalyptic preacher named Jesus in that time period in that place. Nothing about that is extraordinary. I think very likely Jesus did exist. I don't think we can say for certain Jesus did exist as a particular individual. How I'm not sure how you frame the second part, but what do I think about people that hold the mythicist position? I think some of them are kind of nuts, and I think some of them are reasonably well grounded, like Carrier and others who ground it academically. I I don't think we have enough basis to make a definite determination one way or the other. So I think anybody that makes that as a definitive determination, outside of someone who believes that the Bible is true and stuff like that, is doing so on very shaky ground. So I think mythicism in general is on shaky ground.
Of your Christian friends and family members, which one would stand the best chance of convincing you or persuading you than the others? Even if you think none of them stand a chance, some stand more of a chance than others, right? Who would that be and why?
Yes, I don't think any of them would stand a chance at this point. It's been too many years. I've done too much study. I can't imagine myself at this point going back the other direction. If anybody could, it would probably be my good friend Chris, who owns a game store near here. Me, we've had some really wonderful discussions. We are on very different parts of the spectrum politically, religiously, and in all sorts of other ground. But he's one of the kindest, most wonderful human beings I know. Um, so I don't think anybody stands a chance. But if anybody stood a chance, it would probably be him.
What's your favorite film or television series?
Hmm. My favorite TV show, huh? I'm gonna have to conjure on that for a spell and get back to you. Can't stop the signal. You can never stop the signal.
Contingency arguments for God's existence can be framed in a number of ways, obviously, but pick one, and what's your favorite response to this sort of contingency argument? Or if you're really ambitious, what's your favorite response to contingency arguments in general?
Contingency arguments are. I mean, I think they're essentially just God of the gaps arguments, really. I would have to go back through and look at them. I would have to be presented with one specifically. But honestly, they're God of the gaps arguments. They're also making claims about realms that we don't have access to study and that we can't possibly know anything about. Um, I mean, the whole notion that the universe itself is a contingent entity or is contingent on something else, we can't know that. We don't know how it formed. We we know so little about things like that we don't even know all the right questions to ask yet. So I have to go back and look at more or be presented with a specific one to give a more detailed answer. But I mean, I think they're God of the gaps, and I think they are making claims about realms and entities that, if they even exist, we can't possibly know anything about.
On your understanding of Christianity, what does it take for a person to become a Christian and experience everlasting life?
Well, when I was a Christian, I would have said that you have to accept Jesus into your heart, which is kind of vague, but whatever that means. You have to accept God as Lord. You have to not really confess your individual sins, but you have to confess that you are a sinner and repent. I mean, that's roughly it. Um, Honestly, I think anybody that calls themselves a Christian, I give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that they're a Christian.
Whether you think anything in the Bible is true or not, do you think that the Bible or any passage in the Bible seems to teach eternal conscious suffering in hell? Maybe you think it teaches universal ultimate salvation or annihilation, the idea that people will no longer be conscious but will be annihilated and no longer have a conscious experience of anything. And I should say, I'm partly asking that question because a friend of mine, Chris Date at Rethinking Hell, would be happy to have a discussion or a debate on the subject of whether any Bible passage teaches eternal conscious torment.
I would love to have a discussion about this. So, going back to the church I grew up in, the Advent Christian Church, the one doctrine it had that differentiates it from many other churches is conditional immortality. They believe that not everybody will live forever. This is opposed to, as I'm sure you well know, the eternal conscious torment model. Um, Frankly, the fact is that the Bible has passages that support both positions. And I spent a ton of time studying this, researching it while I was a Christian, looking into it, trying to understand it. And the crux of this doctrinal debate comes down to trying to harmonize contradictory verses with your chosen position. That's really it. There are passages on both sides that tend to indicate both things, that strongly suggest or explicitly state both positions. I think this is one of the epic contradictions that's in the Bible, and why there's has been discussion about it in the past, even though the eternal conscious torment model has dominated Christian thought for many hundreds of years. It is, as far as I'm concerned, an open question if you're trying to sort out what the Bible actually says about it. I would love to see content on this. I think it's an awesome topic, and it was one thing I was deeply into as a Christian.
What do you think is the most dangerous or problematic issue that theologically conservative Christians hold to? And I'm talking about an issue or a position, not a person, a movement, or a party. Well, that's the list for.
The most dangerous idea that conservative Christians hold on to. That's a very broad spectrum of people, and it's really hard to isolate a single thing like that, because Christians are all over the maps on some of these kinds of things. The most dangerous one, by far, is the anti-scientific movement that is pushed in a lot of like Southern American evangelicals. I'm talking the Ken Ham, the Kent Hovind, that type of thing, where they literally are denying like demonstrable reality by saying the earth is only 6,000 years old, evolution didn't happen, and that progresses into a whole realm of science denial, which includes climate change for some reason. All of these have been politicized. That's another big problem, is the politification of religion, and that's a really big one that started like in the 80s, at least in this country. The whole focus on the family and Pat Robertson and that kind of thing. Despite the fact that we are supposed to be a secular country and a secular government, politics and religion are deeply interwound at this point. And that's a very dangerous thing. Very, very dangerous thing. But yeah, in general, the anti-science movement is the big one. Anyway, Braxton, thank you so much for making this. I'm sure you'll take a few minutes to watch this video. Hopefully, maybe I'll make it into one of your response to response videos. It was fun talking with you again, and I'll be following you on Twitter, whatever. Take it easy, man.